Hey guys, it's Kevin on this review for The American Season 3, Episode 8, Divestment. And this episode was once again another amazing episode. And one of the things I like about this episode is that it took a little break from the central focus of the season. Because the central focus on the season has been recruiting Paige and how Phillip and Elizabeth's marriage have been. This episode focused a lot more on Clark and Martha and how that relationship is doing, which I actually really enjoyed. I like that it focused more on that because I don't think we've gotten enough focus on that this season. So I think we've gotten enough focus on Paige for a little bit. So that was kind of put a little bit on the back burner in this episode and focused a lot more on Clark and Martha. It also focused on how Philip and Elizabeth are with, it had a lot less of Philip and Elizabeth not in disguise versus Philip and Elizabeth in disguise. A lot more spying in this episode, and I definitely really appreciate that. So let's just get into it because, once again, it was another fantastic episode. So we start with Hans pulling Lookout, and of course, after that crazy ending last week, things just get even crazier here. Because Philip and Elizabeth take Ventnor into a warehouse, and Martha and the other workers talk about the interviews, and they wonder what's going on. And Walter asks to talk to Martha, and Philip tells Vent, because, they don't really know what's going on there, so Philip tells Venter that he's used to being on the other side, but Venter says he was never an interrogator. They make Venter the offer of a new life and $1 million, and he says no. So why would he shut that down? I don't know exactly, but he shut it down. And basically, Philip puts on gloves and sighs, and because they thought that was a good deal and everything, is not working. So Nina's told she did a good job by getting a confession from Evie, and she's told her sentence has been reduced to 10 years, and then she's told it could be sooner, and says Anton. Anton tells her that could be a lot sooner, and her captor says they don't know if he's slowing work to mess with them. He tells her she can get him to trust him, and they will offer her freedom in exchange for help. So they tell her if she succeeds with him, she will have paid her debt in full. So that's good because she can get out a lot earlier than anticipated. And I predicted that Nia was going to get out of jail this season, but I didn't think it was going to be this early. But maybe she's going to get out much earlier than expected, which I really like. So Martha sits with Walter, who asks her if anyone was in Gadd's office alone. And of course, they don't know that she planted the bug. They don't know who did it. And of course, Martha knows that she did it. And of course, as I said last week, she got very scared, and she's still very scared. She's worried that they're going to find out that she planted this bug, and anything bad could happen to her if they find that out. So she says she was his secretary for 7 years, and he asks about the last year, and she says the cleaning people, her agent Brewster, and he asks if she supplies him with office supplies, and she says yes. He asks her about the pen, and she says she doesn't know and says there are so many pens floating around. He asks if anyone gave her the pen to give to Gadd or asked her to tamper with it, and she says no. Now, she's doing whatever she can to lie, and he asks if she was charged with maintaining his pens, and she asks what he means, and he says full of ink. She says he might ask her for a pen and go to the supply cabinet, and she says it doesn't look like one from the supply cabinet. So basically, she's really in a real pickle here because she doesn't know if she, because of course she can't reveal her cover, but at the same time, she's very guilty of what she's doing. So Elizabeth unties the gag from Todd, and he tells her he's cold and asks for his coat, and she says maybe later. She says now she needs his help, and she asks how long he's been working with Venter, and Barav calls Arkady and asks why his son hasn't been transferred to Moscow yet. And he says Oleg is doing important work in the U.S. and wants to finish before he returns to the Soviet Union, because of course Oleg has gone out to find Nina. That's where he's going. He's going to rescue Nina, and that's where he's gone. So Barav is silent, then says he has two sons and says the other is in Afghanistan, but Oleg is not cut of that cloth. And Arkady says Oleg requests to stay until he finishes work, and Arkady says Oleg does good work, and Barav asks him to please watch out for his son. And Ventnor is not doing. So I really like that scene overall. I like seeing it. I like seeing, catching up with them. I thought that was really good. Especially because, Barav hasn't seen him in such a long time. And, if you think about it, Barav, he's not in the U.S. And Oleg is so far away from him. He hasn't seen him in such a long time. And I like that we really focus on that because we don't really get to see them outside of just spying. We don't really get to see that. But I definitely like seeing that right here. So Ventnor is not doing well after Philip beats on him. He says he's not talking. She says Todd told her that Ventnor had him monitoring anti-apartheid groups around this country. And Martha goes to the file cabinet after her interview and tries to calm her nerves. And Stan tells her he's leaving for that funeral and will be gone till tomorrow. And he asks if she's okay, and she says she ate something for lunch that didn't agree with her. And of course, she can't tell him the truth. She can't tell him that she planted the bug and everything and how worried she is about that. And She wishes him a safe trip and he goes. And Walter comes walking past her to grab Adderholt for a chat, and he says he's going to grab a coffee and offers him one. And Martha gives Adderholt a shrug, and Walter comments that Adderholt is new and was raised in Oakland, California. He says he has made a unique background since his father was a janitor. And he tells Walter he also has a dog named Snuffy. And he says he loves working for the borough and worked up while clerking going to Berkeley. And Walter asks to see his pen, and he hands it over, and Walter comments that it's a Mont Blanc, and he says it's a gift from his now ex-wife, who thought he would take care of a better expensive pen, and he says she was right about many things, and Walter says others had a less difficult path to get there, and Adderholt says he doesn't see himself as a victim and has a lot of opportunities there. And Walter thinks asks if he thinks others resent him for being new, and Adderholt says being new isn't a bad thing. He doesn't think much about the rest of it. Now, of course, they keep saying new as in black, because, he's black, and people are still against that in this time period, and I find that very interesting. Walter's such a vulnerable character because of that, and I really enjoyed seeing that here. So Elizabeth unchains Todd and tells him to get up. She brings him outside and sits him across from Mentor, and she pulls a gun and cocks it. Reuben tells her that he gets to do it since they killed his brother. She hands him the gun, but he says they have a way of doing things. And this scene was just, oh my god. This was like the hardest scene to watch of the season. This was insane. This was like Sons of Anarchy insane, really. The Americans never goes this dark, so when shocking things like this happen, it's legitimately shocking. It's not like Sons of Anarchy where something just shocking happens every episode. No, the Americans never goes this graphic, and the fact that they did this was just amazing. He goes to get a tire and a can of gas. He tells Phillip and Elizabeth they can't understand, puts the tire on Venter, who starts to freak out. He tells him that this is because of his crimes against the people of South Africa. He calls Phillip and Elizabeth godless communists and curses Reuben. He says they just want gold. He dumps gas on him, sets the man on fire, and he's screaming in agony. Todd is terrified. He eventually falls over dead, and Phillip and Elizabeth stay silent. And I mean, they have to keep their cover, but you can think that maybe they are a little bit remorseful of what they did, but again, they have to keep their cover. So I definitely really enjoyed that. So we do see some stuff with Paige in this episode. Paige is not in a whole lot of this episode, but she does get some stuff, and what she does get is that she's searching micro fiki articles about civil rights protesters, and she looks up the story of Gregorey Thomas, the guy her mom mentioned. Of course, Gregorey was in season 1, and Todd begs them not to do that to him. And Elizabeth says he got over in his head and says she can now see how that happened. She says he lied to her. She says they won't do that to him and says it's a horrible way to die. She says they'll just put a bullet in his head, and he tells her he'll tell her anything she wants, and he cries. He says he swears he'll tell the truth. She asks what Venter really wanted, and he says Venter told him that things weren't going well. And he says Venter wanted him to set a bomb on campus at a meeting. He says the student groups protesting apartheid wouldn't be blamed. She asks if he agreed to do it. He says he did. He says he didn't do it. He says Venter gave him the bomb, but he never placed it, and he says he was too afraid. So Elizabeth asks where the bomb is, and he says it's in his dorm. They take Todd and load him back in the van. She sees Hans watching, and he runs off. So Nina's then brought into the facility where Anton's working. She's shown to this small room and left there. She sees there is a hairbrush, perfume, a mirror. She has a nicer bed and a blanket and some new clothes, and she gets this sense of hope, and she's smiling, very hopeful about what's going to happen to her. So Oleg comes to see Arkady, closes the door. He asks what he wanted, and Arkady says his father called. He says he wants him back in the Soviet Union. And Oleg says he's used to getting his way. And Oleg says he's Minister of Railways, and you can see that Oleg doesn't really want to listen to his father because they clash a lot. And Arkady asks if that means he won't be able to ride the train when he gets home, and Oleg smirks, and he really doesn't want to go back. He wants to stay in America because that's where he's happy. So I like seeing that, and I thought that was kind of funny there. So Elizabeth drives the van to a stop. They meet Phillip. He has the bomb and says it was where Todd said it would be. Reuben says it would have killed a lot of people, and Phillip says he's just a kid. He's not Venter, and Phillip says he told them what he needs to know, and says Todd is done. And Elizabeth says he can't identify them, and they need to give him this chance. And she opens up the van and hauls Todd out. She unties his hands. They leave him there. They all drive away, and yeah, so Nina waits into an office. Vasil comes in. He says he never thought he would see her again, and she's shocked. And he asks if she didn't know he was in charge of the facility, and she asks if it's too late to ask for his forgiveness, and he says her beauty makes things easy for her, and he says he was a fool, so they are both to blame, and he says she pretended to care for him, and he believed her, and he says they won't interfere with duty, but he tells her he will never forgive her, and he never forgave her. And Philip sits in the car with Ruben. He says he has time. Ruben asks if Elizabeth is at home. He says he thinks so, and Ruben says she's safe and sound and says he can't see his own wife's face sometimes. And he says he can see her hugging the children, but he can't see her face. And Philip says he hasn't seen her in a long time. Ruben says maybe she has another man by now, wouldn't blame her. And again, I really like this because again, it really is focusing on what is eventually going to happen to Philip and Elizabeth, which their relationship, while they have sort of fixed it, it is very tense right now. And every time we see Ruben, I like these scenes we're getting with them because what Ruben's dealing with is what Philip and Elizabeth are dealing with. And he tells him that forgetting is not a bad thing. He says being married and being at war do not always go together. And that is true. You can't, a lot of times when couples are married, they don't get to be married because there's a war going on and they go off to war and they have to go through all that. I mean, I definitely agree with what he says there. So, Philip wishes Ruben safe travels as the car pulls up to get him, and Ruben wishes him well and goes. And I thought that was just a really good scene, just showing how their marriage is overall. So Walter tells Gadd that it was a productive day and says he feels like he was drinking from a fire hose. He asks if Gadd ever considered installing security cameras and from facing the door. He says he's not saying his negligence let the KGB into the borough, but implies it and leaves. So Philip listens to the news of the war in Afghanistan, and Elizabeth comes in and asks what news. He says it's more of the war. She asks his son's name, and he says Misha, and that's who they need to find. They need to find Misha, and I like that we actually got a name from him. So you can see that he's still thinking about this because he wants to know what's going on with his son. Is his son okay? And I like that we are subtly getting to, more facts about his son as this goes on because I want to find out more about his son. So Guy goes to his office and asks Martha for a contingency report. She says it's stuck in the mail robot, and he asks for the keys. He goes to the mail robot and tries to unlock it, but it won't unlock, and he curses and kicks repeatedly, and for whatever reason, it's just not unlocking. So Elizabeth goes downstairs, finds Paige reading at the table, and she says she made Henry eggs, and she says Henry's playing some electronic game he got from Doug, and she says she looked up her friend Gregorey at the library in some news reports, and she says the newspaper said he was a drug dealer, and Elizabeth says his life was complicated and hard, but he always fought for what was right, and he always did what was right, and Paige asks if he was a criminal or not, and her mom says things aren't that simple. Elizabeth says Paige is already fighting against injustice, and she says they fight against people that make laws and governments. And I like what Paige said. She says you can't just go rob banks and things. And her mom says, of course not. But of course, that's what they're doing. They're doing things that are wrong. But that's just because of their cover and everything. And I like that Paige said that to her because it's true. They can't just go out and rob banks. Even if they have to keep their cover, they have to, do things that are kind of inhuman and immoral. What they did with the fire, that's inhuman, but that's just how they are. And I definitely enjoyed seeing that. I thought that conversation was really good overall. So Anton works the computer where Nina brings him a coffee and snack. He says he didn't ask for it. She says she noticed he wasn't eating. He asks if she's watching, but she says she just happened to notice, and he asks why she's there. And she says she's there to help him in any way she can. He asks if she's a scientist, and she says no. And Anton says she's of no use, then complains there's no lemon for his tea. And Martha then sits at home and stews, and this was by far the best scene of the episode. This scene between Martha and Philip I thought was amazing. So Clark comes in and says she started the party without her. He says he's had a crazy day. He tells her he had a meeting that was canceled, but they didn't tell him. He pours wine, says hi. She says she met this man named Walter Taffet, and he asks who that is. She says he's you. She says they found the pens, and she asks who are you. She asks again and scoots away from him, and I like that she doesn't really know what's going on with him. Now, of course, she thinks that he's in an affair or whatever, and she scoots away from him. Philip sits down his wine glass and says he's her husband. He says he's a man. And now I thought he was going to reveal to her full cover because that's what the promo looked like was going to happen. But that's not what happens. He tells her that she married him, when she married who loves her more than she will ever know. She starts crying and asks what she's done. She's panicking, asks again, what have I done? And just the performance from whoever plays Martha did an amazing job in this episode. This was such an amazing scene. And Philip tells her they fall in love, and she asks if any of this is true. He says what matters is they fell in love, and she begs him not to lie to her. He says he's not. He says everything he's about to say is the truth. He says when they first met, he didn't want to fall in love with her. Now she means so much to him, which is kind of true, but at the same time, it's not true because, of course, he just did this because he wants to get information out of her. I do think that Philip genuinely cares for Martha. I do think that he genuinely cares for her. He just doesn't really. Of course, Philip, Elizabeth is his true love, so. He says she has to believe that she's the true and honest woman he's ever known. She's still crying. He tells her he loves her, says he would do anything for her to protect her. He asks if that's enough. He asks if she needs more than that, and she shakes her head no. He touches her, pulls her in for a hug, and I thought that was a really great scene. So Elizabeth goes to see Gabriel. He says he has something for her. He says she's a fighter, hands her this thick envelope, and she tells him this thing with Kimmy is hard on Philip, and she says they know this contact is critical and asks him a favor. He asks her to sit. She asks Gabriel to help Phillips, and I love what she asks him. She asks Gabriel to help Philip's son in Afghanistan to see if he can get him home, and he says he didn't know she knew, but he says Philip told her, and Gabriel says he'll do what he can, and basically he's going to come home. And I think Philip's going to reconnect with his son. I loved seeing that. I think it'd be amazing to see if that happens, and I really hope that does happen because, Philip is so interested in that happening. He wants it to happen. He wants to have some sort of relationship with his son. And I love that Elizabeth wants that to happen for him as well, and I think that is fantastic that she wants that to happen for him. So, the end of the episode, Martha lies awake, looking very stressed out, besides Philip, who also lies awake, and that's how the episode ends. So overall, as usual, another really solid episode, and I really want to talk about what's going on here. Now, this whole thing with Philip's son, I can't wait to see what happens here. I've loved this arc since we started. I think it's really interesting the way it's going, and I hope that they do recruit his son and, bring his son to America because he'll get to have a relationship with him, and it'll just be really great for Philip if that happens. Plus, I feel like Elizabeth's trying to fix their relationship now because, of what happened to them, so I definitely feel like that's going to fix their relationship. As far as Paige goes, Paige, I like that we didn't focus a lot on Paige in this episode because it focused more on Martha and Clark. Martha's eventually going to find out what's going on with Philip. As I said this before, she's going to eventually find out, but for right now, if he doesn't want to tell her, then fine, he doesn't want to tell her. I can understand why he doesn't want to tell her. Totally, I can understand that. But she does not need to, because simply she does not need to know right now. She doesn't really need to know what's going on with him right now, and it's just not his place to tell her right now. That's why he didn't tell her, I don't think. Now, as far as the whole bug thing goes with Gadd, I think Gadd is eventually going to find out what's going on. And, of course, Martha's very worried because no one knows. Stan doesn't know. Gadd doesn't know. This was something she was told to do against all of them, and she's very worried about what's going to happen here. Because, she's the rat. She's the one that did this, and they have no idea it's her that did it. So, her and Walter I find very interesting. I find Walter to be a very interesting character, and he's not getting as respected as he should, and I hope Martha tries to get him to be more respected by everyone, because they're not really respecting him like they should, and he should be a lot more respected, definitely. So then as far as Arcadia and Oleg goes, I think Oleg is not going to listen to his father. I think he's going to stay where he is because that's honestly what Oleg wants to do. And if he wants to do that, I like that he wants to do that. I think that's really good. And then with Nina, I think Nina's going to get out. I really think she's going to get out of prison earlier than anticipated. And I think it's great that she's now working with Anton. It seems like she's genuinely happy, and I'm happy for her because of that. Overall, guys, while this was not my favorite episode of the season, it definitely was a great episode. It was a great episode. I definitely really enjoyed it. My real only complaint with this episode is that some stuff I just did not care as much about. Don't get me wrong, I love seeing them spy, but I care so much more about the Paige storyline that when it's not focusing as much on that, I get kind of bored. And it's not that I was bored with this episode, it's just I felt like the other episodes were a lot better. It was not as bad as episode 6. Episode 6 was very off. This episode was still great, and I loved it, but it just wasn't as good as last week's. Last week's is still the best episode. The other thing I want to talk about is Paige, finding out more about these, get Gregorey. I think by doing that, Paige is already on the road to finding out the truth. I mean, Gregorey, of course, worked with Elizabeth. He knew her true identity. He knew her from, if I remember correctly, he knew her from, childhood or something like that. And they almost started a relationship, if I remember correctly. And I think that Paige is going to find out their true identity this way. Because, again, in that one promo, she tells them that she just suddenly starts to question them. And I think what's going to get that to happen is her uncovering more about Gregorey. So her uncovering more about Gregorey, she's already on the road to finding out their true identities. And I can't wait to see what happens when she does find out their true identity. It's going to be amazing to watch. I can't wait to see what happens there. And I can't wait for that. But overall, guys, this was a great episode. Always love the Americans. And that's my review. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Let me know if you guys saw this episode. I'll see you guys in my next video, which will be my review for the season of Empire. Because the season finale was tonight, and it just ended. And I want to review it, so I will see you guys for that. Okay, bye.